Welcome to the video, 2 Constructionist Secrets to Personal Growth, Discernment and Dissociation. My name is Dr. Stephen Bacon. I'm a clinical psychologist in Santa Barbara, California, and I've spent the past decade writing books and researching exactly how psychotherapy works. The sense of relief. The analogy that we continue to return to is the client in the exorcism culture that credibly learns that in reality there are no malevolent spirits. This insight is greeted with incredible relief. Understanding that what has been so feared and dreaded doesn't exist generates enormous comfort and optimism. A Western analogy for this level of relief would be a religious person who believed that their bad action guaranteed that they would be experiencing eternal damnation upon death. Learning that hell is simply a construction would be an enormous relief. The mental health analogy is a bit more complex. Suffering exists simply as a result of being human and being in the world. The explanation for the suffering, however, is constructed. The explanation has a great deal of implicit power. In other words, difficult explanations can greatly increase suffering, and helpful explanations can reduce it. The effect of explanations. Constructionism shows that all the explanations are made up or constructed. In this sense, we can choose our explanations instead of merely accepting the ones recommended by our culture. The effect of choosing benign explanations in place of difficult ones is similar to the exorcism client who realizes that the spirits are not real. I no longer am limited by the painful explanations endorsed by most around me. Examples range from hearing, "You have clinical depression and must take antidepressants the rest of your life," to "You're an alcoholic and are different from a normie," to "Your childhood trauma makes it difficult for you to have healthy relationships," to "You're a borderline personality disorder, and that condition is almost impossible to treat." Discernment. The explanations used by Western psychiatry and psychotherapy are not value-free. In fact, they have the capacity to strongly amplify the human suffering they purport to explain. This is similar to the spirit explanation in the exorcism culture. Spirits provide a reasonably convincing explanation for mental health symptoms. Unfortunately, they come with lots of baggage. They create an atmosphere of terror and vulnerability, imply that the person has some kind of defect that makes them susceptible to spirit possession, and require a person to live in a world where the forces of evil have great power. It is difficult to separate the explanation for the suffering from the suffering itself. The ability to distinguish between the two is what is called discernment. Using this discernment and realizing that all psychiatric explanations are constructed, one can choose to only internalize the helpful and empowering explanations and reject the pathological one. Pragmatics. For example, it can feel helpful to ascribe not getting a college education to an impoverished background. Such an explanation tends to minimize the chance that I will feel shame and guilt about failing to pursue my educational possibilities. Conversely, if I use this same impoverished background to argue, no one that I desire will ever choose me because of my background of poverty, I will amplify the level of suffering that is implicit in seeking romantic partnership. This leads directly to the question of the reality of explanations. In the examples above, neither explanation is definitively real. There are many people from impoverished backgrounds that get college educations, and there are many romantic relationships that cross class boundaries. While both explanations can be true statistically, they describe factors that affect many people. They are not true individually. Useful versus true. Even if an explanation cannot be stringently true, it can still be useful. The first explanation is useful in terms of cultivating personal growth and health. The second explanation is the opposite. Beyond whether an explanation feels right or is useful or has a positive effect, there can be a sense that it advances a person on their unique path. Swami Vivekananda points out, quote, If a man can realize his divine nature with the help of an image, would it be right to call that a sin? Nor even when he has passed that stage should he call it an error. Man is not traveling from error to truth, but from truth to truth, from lower to higher truth. To him, all the religions, from the lowest fetishism to the highest absolutism, mean so many attempts of the human soul to grasp and realize the infinite, each determined by the conditions of its birth and association, and each of these marks a stage of progress. And every soul is a young eagle, soaring higher and higher, gathering more and more strength till it reaches the glorious sun. Constructed reality and the individual path. In this quote, Vivekananda, an Indian spiritual teacher, is arguing that even when explanations and understandings fail to embody the highest principles, they can still advance a person along their own path. Paul Tillich, a Protestant theologian, believes that each step in a valid path participates in its terminus, the idealized goal. Tillich is completely aligned with Vivekananda in asserting that, quote, lower truths are transformed and redeemed as long as they are steps toward one's own destiny. From a constructionist and psychological perspective, this implies that if one needs to be angry at a parent or resolve some unfinished business with a significant other, these actions can still embody truth, regardless of how constructed they may appear from an objective perspective. Suffering. Discernment is designed to take care of the way negative explanations exacerbate suffering. Even if you are great at discernment, given that you are living a human life, you will still experience some suffering. Dissociation is the way to deal with the actuality of suffering. Suffering is painful in itself. For example, it's emotionally challenging to be rejected for a job or a romantic relationship. And it is also painful in that it sets us up to have dysfunctional feelings and to use dysfunctional strategies. For example, if I have lots of experiences earlier in life of betrayal and abuse from authority figures, I'm likely to have distrust of authorities or even be prone to aggression. I experienced suffering with the initial experience of authority, and now the suffering is likely to continue, given that I now have difficult feelings about authority. Constructionism and letting go. Most personal growth seekers have some unproductive feelings or strategies that are similar to the authority example. It's logical to want to change such feelings. And since feelings and strategies are constructed and we understand their fluidity, it should be relatively easy to change dysfunctional parts of ourselves. And sometimes it's just that easy. One perceives a situation and the reaction to it, sees that the reaction is dysfunctional, and lets it go. Problem solved. This is especially common when one changes environment. For example, if I join a spiritual group and start associating with other seekers, many people have reported that they find it relatively easy to let go of some of their negative strategies and feelings. Resistance and shame. Most of the time, however, people find it difficult to change their dysfunctional habits. The single biggest obstacle to such change is that we have been taught to shame ourselves into improvement. More specifically, Western culture teaches that shaming oneself about bad behaviors both demonstrates remorse, you ought to be ashamed of yourself, and increases motivation to change. Unfortunately, associating guilt and shame with pathological feelings or strategies paradoxically makes it much more difficult to change the feelings. It's as if the psyche gets stubborn, dug in, and becomes more committed to the pathologies. As a result of this dynamic, psychotherapists frequently tell their clients that too much guilt and shame is counterproductive and urge their clients to work hard at self-forgiveness. The key role of dissociation. Dissociation is simply a functional way to minimize this shame and guilt. To practice dissociation, see the psyche as a collection of parts and let all the dysfunction be concentrated in one part. Dissociation lets us empathize with this less enlightened part of the psyche without getting all caught up in it. Saying, a part of me thinks I'm a forever loser because I lost my job, is not all that hard. Lots of us react like that, at least for a while. And when we get a life reversal, it's not that surprising. And as long as we don't deepen the feelings by being ashamed of them, it doesn't have to be that serious. As long as I can identify with the healthy part of the psyche and let the dysfunctional feelings associate with a different part, it's relatively easy to work with that part. Guilt and shame are reduced by the idea that the bad strategies are not me, even though they are part of me. Moreover, the situation is normalized. There's a clear sense that everyone has some poor strategies. These are as inevitable as suffering. In the same sense, one never gets all the dysfunction fully resolved. Being human means that my flaws can improve, and some might even disappear, but being flawed is my basic nature. This is the embodiment of the light touch characterizing constructionism. Constructionism and dissociation. Constructionism, of course, adds significantly to this ego state strategy. It does this by its relationship to a parts model of personality. If I am a whole composed of parts, every part I create, every part I'm thinking about is a construction. How many parts do I really have? If I work with different therapists, they will tell me I have a different number and type of parts. If I focus on a different problem, I might identify different parts in order to deal with it. All this fluidity is familiar to the constructionist. Not being hung up on the reality of the parts, accepting that they are constructions, allows us to touch the material associated with each part lightly. Put another way, the dysfunctional strategies and feelings are revealed as ephemeral and malleable, which is exactly what we want when we are in the change and personal growth business. In sum, use discernment to know the difference between human suffering and the explanations for the suffering. Use dissociation to assign the dysfunction to a part of ourselves. When all the dysfunction is in a part I am not identified with, it is relatively easy to change, given that we have significantly reduced or eliminated shame and guilt. Constructionism and lightness. Human suffering is not light. Regardless of detachment, wisdom, or spirituality, it remains a significant burden in life. That said, constructionism raises the possibility of lightness about the explanations for suffering. The sign that one understands constructionism is the presence of this lightness. Constructionism doesn't resolve the issues of human suffering, but those who understand its principles can be recognized by their sense of acceptance and ease. It is quite a relief to let go of the explanations for suffering. More specifically, facing suffering as suffering without amplifying it or deepening it via cultural explanations does indeed foster a life characterized by lightness. Dissociation and the self. The question of who am I and what is the self has dazzled and befuddled philosophers throughout history. When a constructionist attempts to dissociate from part of their psyche, who has the right to say that they have to own the feelings and confusions of that ego state? It is perfectly reasonable to argue that this part is simply a residual state programmed by one's home culture, a subpersonality that works to be a good boy or a good girl in the sight of the Apollonians. It's true that the classic way to work with these parts is to elicit a hidden positive motive, and that kind of work is often useful and appropriate. But we should be aware that a stipulated positive motive is itself a construction. It can be just as useful to identify the ego state that is full of shame or resentment or other negative emotions and simply let that part go. Let it be. The psyche isn't always purposeful. Sometimes it's just something that includes some residual conditioning that has little to contribute, and constructionism provides a perspective that argues that it simply can be ignored. Psyche as constructed. The sense that much of the psyche is as constructed and programmed as the rest of human culture can be very liberating. If constructionism is known for anything, it is clearly famous for being fluid and amorphous. Put another way, There are very few rules or limitations when it comes to healing the psyche. This suggests that psychological approaches to mind are simply one way to look at its healing and evolution. More specifically, most work with the mind throughout history has been done by philosophers and spiritual teachers. In this sense, this work embodies a change strategy that is beyond psychology. Constructionist traditions and wisdom. As one might expect, Constructionism has been an integral part of most Eastern spirituality and much of Western mystical traditions. We are going to offer a series of quotes from well-known philosophers and spiritual teachers, illustrating how they integrated Constructionism into their work. More specifically, we are going to look at the tradition of Eastern Constructionism as embodied by the teachings of Swami Vivekananda, an early 20th century yogi, Western Constructionism as embodied by Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi, a 13th century Sufi mystic, and a modern contribution from psychologist spiritual teacher Richard Alpert, Ram Dass, the person who arguably is most responsible for introducing Eastern thought to the West in the 1970s. Awakening. No one becomes a constructionist unless they feel there is something wrong with accepting culturally programmed reality. Life events, encounters with teachers and mentors, and serious reflection contribute to our own awakening. An awakening to the truth that we primarily live in constructed reality. Ram Dass comments, "My colleagues and I were 9-to-5 psychologists. We came to work every day and we did our psychology, just like you would do insurance or auto mechanics. And then at 5 we went home, and we were just as neurotic as we were before we went to work. Somehow it seemed to me, if all this theory were right, it should play more intimately into my own life." In addition to reflection and discernment, Ram Dass believes that drugs were helpful at this stage of growth. "Psychedelics helped me to escape, albeit momentarily, from the prison of my mind. It overrode the habit patterns of thought, and I was able to taste innocence again. Looking at sensations freshly, without the conceptual overlay, was very profound." Encouragement. Rumi joins Ram Dass in emphasizing the importance of waking up. He first discusses the fact that most of us are seduced by conventional programming. "Sit, be still and listen, because you're drunk and we're at the edge of the roof." Next, Rumi offers encouragement. "Please wake up." "Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open?" Finally, Rumi offers a different kind of encouragement. "After awakening, there will always be a pull to abandon the constructionist perspective. The breezes at dawn have secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the doorsill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep." Atypical learning. Rumi begins with the idea that constructionist ideas are provocative or even abhorrent to a typical Apollonian cultural member. Tell a standard therapist that all their explanations are constructed, that techniques have no inherent power, and their privileged knowledge is unrelated to outcomes. You will get quite a reaction. Quote, "Run from what's comfortable. Forget safety. Live where you fear to live. Destroy your reputation. Be notorious. I have tried prudent planning long enough. From now on, I'll be mad." Ram Dass described this atypical style of learning in a related manner. "I don't really believe anything I say, because the nature of my work concerns the spaces between the words rather than the words themselves." Self-reliance and self-confidence. Swami Vivekananda discusses taking the constructionist path as a question of boldness and self-reliance. "Stand up, be bold, be strong. Take the whole responsibility on your own shoulders, and know that you are the creator of your own destiny. All the strength and succor you want is within yourself. Therefore, make your own future." Like Rumi, Vivekananda offers words of encouragement. Be not afraid of anything. You will do marvelous work. It is fearlessness that brings heaven, even in a moment. Rumi also emphasizes courage, boldness, and self-reliance. Don't be satisfied with stories, how things have gone with others. Unfold your myth. Meaning, imposed or discovered. Constructionists always come back to the human need to impose meaning on events. Ram Dass comments, the thing about perspective is something happens. It means nothing. We make up a story about what it means based on what we feel. This story becomes our truth. This story creates our reality, our world, what is possible and what is not. Constructionism and relativity are closely related. When one can see that what seems solid is actually ephemeral and malleable, and that everything is in relationship with everything else, everything is relative to everything else, that is constructionism. Ram Dass comments, what Einstein demonstrated in physics is equally true of all other aspects of the cosmos. All reality is relative. Each reality is true only within given limits. It is only one possible version of the way things are. There are always multiple versions of reality. To awaken from any single reality is to recognize its relative nature. How real is our idea of self? The reason that constructionism is so powerful in personal growth is that the solid sense of self is deconstructed. If myself is malleable, then how hard can change be? Ram Dass comments, a moment reflection will show you that you play many roles in the course of a day, and that who you are from moment to moment changes. There's the angry you and the kind you, the lazy you, the lustful you, hundreds of different yous. Gurdjieff points out that sometimes one you does something for which all the other yous must pay for years, or possibly the rest of this life. Ram Dass also cautions us not to take our perceptions of reality too seriously. What we're seeing out there is the projection of where we're at, the projection of the clingings of our minds. Again, when we see everything as relative and constructed, change is easy. Lightness, humor, and illusion. Holding everything tightly is Apollonian. Being serious is Apollonian. Knowing how things really are is Apollonian. The constructionist trades overconfidence for wisdom and trades stability for the ability to change, grow, and adapt. Rumi says, sell your cleverness and buy bewilderment. Cleverness is mere opinion. Bewilderment brings intuitive knowledge. Humor is one of the best ways to touch life lightly. Touching life lightly is one of the chief characteristics of constructionism. Ram Dass comments, cosmic humor, especially about your own predicament, is an important part of your journey. Ram Dass points out that even spiritual practices are constructed and need to be touched lightly. All spiritual practices are illusions created by illusionists to escape illusion. Relax, you're already there. Rumi points out that work and effort mean something different in constructed reality. Quote, you wander from room to room, hunting for the diamond necklace that is already around your neck. Vivekananda strongly agrees. All the powers in the universe are already ours. It is we who have put our hands before our eyes and cry that it is dark. And Rumi further elaborates on the same theme. I have lived on the lip of insanity, wanting to know reasons. Knocking on a door, it opens. I've been knocking from the inside. But a certain strength is required. Ram Dass might agree that we are always essentially free, but part of the journey requires a kind of toughness. Quote, don't treat yourself so gingerly. You can let go of stuff. Sometimes it takes 3 breaths instead of 2 to do it, but you can do it. Be a little tougher and don't cling to stuff. People go around carrying everybody's stuff all of the time. I just pick it up and put it down. Pick it up and put it down. That doesn't mean I'm not compassionate. It doesn't mean I don't love people, but holding on to people's suffering is not compassionate for them or for you. Vivekananda strongly agrees that resolving psychological issues requires resolve. The remedy for weakness is not brooding over weakness, but thinking of strength. And further, dare to be free, dare to go as far as your thought leads, and dare to carry that out in your life. There is a path open to you. Rumi tells us that there is a way forward. There's a candle in your heart ready to be kindled. There's a void in your soul ready to be filled. You feel it, don't you? And further, as you start to walk on the way appears. While encouraging signs are always there, and there is often an experience of connection and external validation, inner resources stay central. Constructionism requires self-affirmation and self-confidence. Vivekananda comments, you have to grow from the inside out. None can teach you, none can make you spiritual. There is no other teacher but your own soul. In spite of this requirement of self-reliance, there is always an equally important emphasis that simple being can show the way. Rumi refers to this level of opening. On a day when the wind is perfect, the sail just needs to open, and the world is full of beauty. Today is such a day. Constructionism, non-dualism, and a poetic goal. In the following quote, Rumi shows just how important it is to surrender the Apollonian ideas of black and white to arrive at the goal. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about.